Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, everyone. Greetings from Brussels. My name is Roberto Rinaldi. I am a policy officer at the European Committee of the Regions, and I will be your moderator today. This is a thematic webinar on resources mobilization, and this event is part of the Edinburgh process, but is also part of the World Environment Day that we are going to celebrate tomorrow. And before we actually start with the event itself, just a few housekeeping information. The first one is about the structure. So we will start with two scene-setting messages by John Mote and by Tracy Cumming, and then we will listen the experiences of four remarkable guests from a little bit all over the world. And then we move towards the more interactive part of this webinar. We will indeed have a discussion with all the participants based on the questions that you should have seen via the Attendify app, and how to participate to the more interactive part of this webinar. If you click on participants logo, which you should find at the bottom of your screen, you will then see on your right the possibility to raise your hand. So you click on that, and when we will have the debate with the audience, it will be possible for us to give you the floor. In the meantime, if you could please mute yourself, this will facilitate for everyone to listen to the other speakers. And if you have any specific questions to one of the speakers and there is no time to address it, please feel free to share this question in the chat. And now I think that that's all for my side. I think I would like to give the floor to John from the Scottish Government to tell us a little bit more about the Edinburgh process and why we're here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberto. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Mote. I work on international policy within the Scottish Government Marine Conservation Team. And as Roberto said, I'd just like to take a little bit of time to highlight the Edinburgh process and how this webinar fits into that process. Next slide, please. Or to give it its full name, the Edinburgh Process for Subnational and Local Governments on the Development of the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. You can see why we're using the short title. This has been developed to ensure that the views of subnational and local governments are included in the development of the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And this includes regional governments, local authorities and cities, as well as subnational governments. The Convention on Biological Diversity are currently developing the framework with the aim to finalise it at COP15 in China next year. We're not sure exactly when that date will be yet. And given the key role of subnational and local governments in delivering biodiversity at local levels, it's right that we feed subnational views into this process so that we can have realistic and deliverable actions to implement it over the next 10 years. We have developed the Edinburgh process in conjunction with the CBD and our global Edinburgh partners that you can see outlined on the slide here. And these include a range of organisations, whether they're subnational governments themselves or networks that are playing a leading role in the subnational constituency and representing their views. Next slide, please. The Edinburgh process began on the 24th of April and will actually continue right up until COP15 in Kunming next year. About a month ago, we held a series of regional online information sessions explaining the process as outlined in the yellow box. And if you missed these, you can actually catch them on our YouTube channel or through the Attendify app if you've signed up to that. There are two consultations running at the moment, one on the zero draft and one on a renewed subnational plan of action, which would aim to be adopted at COP15 to gather the views of subnational and local governments. These were due to end on the 29th of May, but we've extended the deadline for responses until the 12th of June because we're aware that some delegates were having difficulty responding within the time frame, particularly with the difficulties of response to COVID-19 is placing on us all at the moment. So we've given an extra couple of weeks for people to respond. And if you haven't done so, I would encourage you to submit your views on both of these points so we can feed them back to the CBD in upcoming meetings. You can find all the documents and the links on how to respond on the Attendify app. And we'll work to collect these and we'll be able to report back the key issues arising in our second series of information sessions, which will be now held on the 2nd of July. We'll also shortly issue the Edinburgh Declaration for consultation, which is a high-level political statement that we hope will capture the views of subnational actors. And we aim, once this is up, to have this open for signature right up to COP15. As well as the consultations, we're delighted that alongside our partners, we've been able to put together this themed webinars to discuss in more detail some of the key issues that are included in the post-2020 framework and which are central to the role of subnational and local government. This is the last in the webinar series, and we will use key issues arising from discussion to feed back into the Edinburgh process report, which will be submitted to various CBD meetings and to set out a stronger role for subnational actors in the framework. Next slide, please. We've already had 3 excellent webinars covering monitoring and reporting tools, linkages between climate change and biodiversity and nature-based solutions. These have been very helpful in drawing out the key issues in the role of subnational government. If you took part in these, great, thanks for your input. If you haven't and you want to look back over these, again, the videos are on our YouTube channel and are shared through Attendify. For today, I just want to congratulate the Committee of the Regions and Roberto for pulling together today's very interesting webinar. Roberto and Steve are working hard to pull it together, and we appreciate the effort. Resource mobilisation from government sources at all levels and from the private sector will be key in ensuring that the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework is fully implemented and we reach the goals and targets that will be set for 2030. We're aware that there's still a significant gap between the resources that are available and the resources that are needed, and hopefully today we'll identify some opportunities to address that. And we're also at a very important moment as we pursue what we hope will be a green recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. There's a significant opportunity there to make sure that resource mobilisation for biodiversity is a key part of those recovery packages going forward. So it's a good time for us to be discussing that issue. I won't say any more than that. I will hand you back over to Roberto to take us through the main details from now on. Thank you. You're muted, Roberto.
Was I speaking all by myself?
Yeah.
Very well. I was saying that I wanted to thank you. Actually, it's me thanking you and all the Scottish Government team for all your support. I was thinking about Sue, Martha, and Cassia, and all the other Edinburgh process partners, because I think that despite the big challenge that we had to face with the COVID-19, we were able to make such a good difference with this process. And now I would like to give the floor to Tracy. Tracy she's a member of the expert panel on resource mobilization of the UN CBD. And I will now give you the floor, and the presentation is up and running. Tracy, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's really great to be joining this process. I have to say I haven't been part of earlier events, and I'm going to head over to YouTube after this event. And I'm glad I can be here now. So thanks for the intro. I'm Tracy Cumming, and as mentioned, I am one of 3 on the panel of experts for resource mobilization. My other job is I'm a technical advisor with the UNDP Biodiversity Finance Initiative, which works with, I think now, 35 countries around the world on this topic. Next slide, please. Thanks. So I'm not sure how aware everyone is of this, but sometime last year, October last year, the CBD panel of experts on resource mobilization was appointed with basically 3 large tasks to deal with. The first one was essentially a look backwards over the last 10 years, which we call a review of experiences and evaluation of the current strategy for resource mobilization, really saying, what have we done on this topic? What's worked, what hasn't worked, and what needs a bit more attention. That was led by Jeremy Eppel. The next piece of work was on an estimation of resources needed to implement the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. That work is currently being led by Jascha Pfefferholz. And my responsibility was what I'm going to talk to you about today, which has a horribly unexciting title, which is a contribution to the resource mobilization component of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. What that means is, looking forward over the next 10 years, what do we need to do in this particular area? All 3 of these documents will be ready for the SBI, for parties to discuss at the next SBI. Only one of them, that first one, the larger version of that, has just been posted on the SBI website. Jascha's report on the estimation of resources, he will only be developing an interim report, and that should be on the website in the next few weeks. His final report will be done closer to the COP, and my report should be posted on the website, the CBD website, hopefully in the next week or 2. Next slide, please. So this third report of the CBD panel of experts aims to basically present a strategic approach and key recommendations for resource mobilization. We've got some key messages that we really want parties to consider. The first one is resource mobilization is going to require transformative, inclusive, and equitable change across economies and across society. There will be important roles for the public sector, but also the private sector and the finance sector. This is one thing that came up in early discussions, that the finance sector and the private sector hasn't been looked at well enough in the past, and we really need to do more in this space. The approach that we've designed is really built around 3 interconnected components, and we believe that all 3 of these are incredibly important. And if we don't do one of them, the other 2 lose. The first one is reduce or redirect resources that are causing harm to biodiversity. The second is generate additional resources from all sources. And the third is enhance the effectiveness and efficiency of resource use. Mainstreaming of biodiversity is actually an important approach in all 3 of these things. Next slide, please. So the next few minutes, I'm just going to go through those 3 components one by one and highlight the kind of high-level actions that we think are really important here. The how these things get done, and the most important challenges that we think need to be addressed and how to address them. That's the one level of detail down that's in the report. So I'm encouraging you to read the report when it comes out. So the first component, reduce or redirect resources causing harm to biodiversity. Firstly, all governments across all levels and all sectors need to make sure that their budget results in at least no net harm to biodiversity. We cannot be spending money on restoration and protected areas in one ministry and then spending a whole lot of money on infrastructure or water management in another industry that actually harms biodiversity. Similarly, international development finance, including for climate change, but not limited to climate change, must also make sure that any funding from ODA should not harm biodiversity. Then the finance and the business sectors, we believe, need to incorporate biodiversity impacts, dependencies, and risks into the way they do business, not as corporate social investment, but literally into the way they do business. There are some really exciting movements in this space. Central banks are doing things, development banks are doing things. There's a consortium of businesses and individual businesses that are starting to do this, and not just at a project level, but almost at a systemic level. And we've put forward some recommendations on how this whole process can be scaled up. And then lastly, we know we need to reform our harmful incentives. That includes subsidies, but isn't limited to subsidies. We also need to develop incentives to encourage biodiversity positive behavior, so our carrots, and at the same time improve our disincentives, or incentives that discourage harmful behavior. So we need sticks and carrots that work. Next slide, please. Thanks. Okay, so the second component, generate additional resources from all sources. We know, and we're stating clearly, that domestic public expenditure is going to continue to be important for biodiversity. Both direct funding, in other words, funding that's tagged specifically for biodiversity, but also indirect funding for biodiversity. And what we mean by that is funding that is primarily set aside for other objectives, but have biodiversity co-benefits. There's massive scope for increasing biodiversity funding through this approach. An obvious one is biodiversity benefits through climate change, nature-based solutions for climate change, but there are other places where there can be increased funding for biodiversity that sits in indirect stream. The same goes for international development finance. There are ways to increase funding for biodiversity from co-benefits with other funding flows. And we know we need more international development finance around the world, flowing to all sorts of countries to support biodiversity work. The business and finance sectors, we've highlighted some key areas that we can focus on to increase investment in biodiversity positive projects, both for the business sector. So what do they need to find projects that they can really get into and generate a profit from? But also in the finance sector, what do they need? How do they measure benefits in biodiversity? How do they measure how they engage with these projects? And how do they invest more in these projects and encourage more investment? And then finally, we know we need to enhance the implementation of access and benefit sharing agreements. Next slide, please. Right, our third component, enhance the effectiveness and efficiency of resource use. These are essentially enabling actions that we think are incredibly important to make sure that the other two components really work. If we do these things right, then generating additional resources and reducing harmful expenditure will work better. So I've got 5 areas to talk about here, and all of them, it's either creating new work here or enhancing the work we're already doing. The first one is good governance and good planning within the public sector. The second is partnerships and platforms for policy coherence, for shared learning, and for the creation of joint approaches. The third is capacity building, technical assistance, and technological cooperation on a sustained basis. So not dropped in, do a workshop and disappear. It's hand-holding through things that are actually pretty complex, and pretty complex for all countries. That's what we're finding. This stuff is hard, and it's hard around the world, and we need to acknowledge that, and we need to cater for that. We also believe that the flow and the uptake of international development finance could be improved. That partly relates to the GEF, but it's not limited to the GEF. There are things we can do across the board there. And then finally, monitoring and reporting processes for resource mobilization need to be improved. We need to know how much we're spending, where we're spending it, how much harm we're causing, in order to measure our changes. Next slide, please. So that's it. That is the high level framework of the third report of the panel of experts on resource mobilization. Obviously it was drafted for everything, but you know, when I look at all of these activities, there's so much relevance to subnational processes, to the work that's going on in cities and in municipalities. And I think there are real benefits for a group like this to take on this kind of thinking and see if it makes sense to your own approach to resource mobilization. And that's it from me.
Thank you very much, Tracy. Sorry. And I mean, very clear. Well, reduce and redirect resources, generate and enhance resources. And I really look forward to read the full report and see how to do this. So as you said, just remind me, the report is expected to be published next week. Is that correct?
I hope so. It should be on the CBD website as a document for SBI 3. I hope next week. Yeah.
At the earliest. Otherwise, continue to have a look at the CBD website, so you will see this amazing report. Thank you very much, Tracy. I'm now looking quickly at the chat to see if there is any specific questions. Let me see. It seems not. So what I'm going to do is we're going to enter into the second part of the webinar, where we listen a little bit more to kind of from the theory to the practice side of the story. We will start with the first example. It comes from Robbie Beaver. Robbie Beaver is a member of the European Committee of the Regions, and he is also a member of the Battenburg Communal Council in Luxembourg. Unfortunately, he had a last-minute issue with, so he cannot be here with us today. However, we pre-recorded a message where he presents the study that the Committee of the Regions just published last March about the existing opportunities for biodiversity finance for small and medium, for local and regional authorities. So if you have questions on this specific report, I can also address them because I also worked on this report. So now I hand it over to Robbie for the video.
Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to you all. My name is Robbie Beaver, and as Roberto just mentioned, I'm a city councillor of Battenburg in Luxembourg. And thanks to this position, I am a member of the European Committee of the Regions, which is the institution that voices the concerns of all subnational governments within the European Union policy-making process. In particular, the Committee of the Regions adopts what we call opinions. These opinions are official documents that state the position of local and regional authorities in the European Union with respect to a specific topic. For example, I am currently the rapporteur of the opinion on biodiversity. The aim of this opinion is to make sure that the role of local and regional authorities is fully recognized in the strategy on biodiversity of the European Union for the next 10 years. The opinion aims also to have such a role recognized in the global context. It is indeed our priority to make sure that local and subnational governments are formally recognized as key actors in the post-2020 global biodiversity policy framework. One of the main points that my opinion will address is biodiversity finance. On this topic, the Committee of the Regions published in March of this year, right before the pandemic, a study on the opportunities and the challenges for subnational governments of the European Union in accessing and using the existing finance opportunities for biodiversity action. The study provided first an overview on those opportunities that exist at European level. It then focuses on five European countries: France, Italy, Poland, Luxembourg, and Finland. Thanks to this review of existing opportunities, it was possible to identify the main barriers and challenges in accessing such funding. Due to time constraints, I will only mention these barriers to biodiversity finance, but if there is time during the debate, we can provide more details. The barriers and challenges in the financing and implementation of biodiversity-related projects that the study identifies as 7. You can see them on the slide. It's first, budgetary constraints and limited funding, specifically and explicitly dedicated to biodiversity. it is insufficient knowledge for local administrations on how to combine available financing opportunities and innovative instruments. Third, it's a lack of awareness of the multi-benefits of nature. Unfortunately, nature projects are often perceived as investments without any tangible profit for municipalities. Fourth, insufficient links between biodiversity and other related policy, such as climate change adaptation and/or mitigation. And fifth, there is also an insufficient administrative capacity and expertise in the local administrations of the European Union. And sixth, nature conservation is not always high on priority lists at various levels of administration, including regional and local level. However, this may change if the local and regional administrations and politicians understand that investing now in nature protection and restoration is a long-term preventive measure to future pandemics. And seventh, finally, on nature-based solutions, despite gradually gaining in popularity, knowledge is lacking on best fit solutions in various natural, climate, and socio-economic conditions. Many examples of small local projects exist, but their replication and/or upscaling requires technical expertise that is not often readily available to subnational governments. Let me conclude by saying that we should not be discouraged by the existence of these barriers. We should actually be positive about it. Now we know what the problems are. We just need to make sure that the post-2020 global biodiversity policy framework contains the solutions to these problems. The Committee of the Regions is working towards this by including such solutions in the opinion that will contribute to shape the future strategy of the European Union on biodiversity. However, we are also working together with international organizations and networks such as the partners of the Edinburgh process to make sure that these solutions are part of the resources mobilization strategy to adopt by the next COP if we want to be able to conserve, to restore and to thrive nature. Thank you for your presence and your inputs.
I would say thank you also to Robbie for his time, and what it's interesting to just to add is that the report was done right before the pandemic, so it's going to be very interesting to see how the 6 points on the appreciation of investing now in nature as a preventive measure, how this will change, will shift among the different local and regional authorities after that the pandemic took place, because this is something that, for example, in Europe is under discussion at the moment. I'm now seeing if there are any questions over here on the chat. I see there are already some comments going on and some appreciation by Sue, and I think that we can now travel a little bit virtually. We move from Europe to Japan. I leave the floor to Teru. Teru works as a director at the Department of the Environment in Aichi Prefecture. Teru, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberto. I'm very glad to have such an honorable opportunity to show our initiative on resource mobilization on the ground. Please let me share my screen. Oh, yes, can you see it?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Right. Mm-hmm. Okay. My name is Teru Kisuna. I'm working for Aichi Prefecture in Japan. I'd like to introduce our initiative on resource mobilization on the ground. This is our planet. And Japan is here off the east edge of Asian continent. Northern eastern Asian countries, including Japan, have been deeply affected by Confucianism. So I think the background of culture is quite different from that of Western countries. Aichi Prefecture is in the middle of the main island. Manufacturing industry, such as automobile or aircraft, prosperous here, but there are still rich biodiversity like beautiful mountainside or broad sand beach facing to the ocean. Regarding resource mobilization, Aichi has been putting weight on engagement of stakeholders. Engaging many people and organizations leads to increase of resource for conserving activities, their properties, skills, times, and possibly money. We have established 9 ecosystem network councils consisting of various stakeholders and catalyzing collaboration among them by sharing common image of ecosystems. Now we have all municipalities and more than 60 private companies and 40 academic organizations are engaged in the councils. This is a green belt of private companies to separate the factories from original land and created about 50 years ago. But after COP10, collaboration among youth, private companies, and NPOs started to improve green belt as animal habitat by creating ponds or animal pathways and replacing alien trees with endemic ones. As a result, wild rabbit and then foxes came to be observed in the factories. But such engagement are supported mainly by Aichi Forest and Greenery Tax. This is a financial resource dedicated for public benefit of forest and greenery based on prefecture ordinance. The prefecture government charges 500 yen per capita and 5% excess on corporate tax on per capita. The revenue is about 2.2 billion yen or 20 million US dollars per year, all of which is stocked in a fund, then spent for 3 purposes. 2/3 of the fund are allocated for forest, and around 30% is used for urban greenery, and several percent are spent for subsidizing, conserving, or educational activity. I myself am in charge of the last one, and this scheme is reviewed every 5 years. The purpose of the forest tax is to increase the public benefits such as disaster reduction, biodiversity, urban amenity, water sources, etc. In Japan, it's generally recognized that healthy forests provide good habitat for flora and fauna. And these understandings are well shared by people in Japan. But the forest tax is not an invention of Aichi. It was introduced in another prefecture, Kochi prefecture, for the first time, and then many prefectures have followed. And through this process, the concept of payment for ecosystem services has taken root across Japan, I think. And last year, the national government of Japan introduced national tax for forest. This charge the people 1,000 yen per capita per year is double of Aichi's. and all revenue, about 60 billion yen or 550 million US dollars, will be distributed mainly to municipalities. So this will enhance the financial resource for municipalities a lot. So this is our experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to you, Teru. And you may be happy to know that in the chat, Gillian was sharing the fact that there is a very similar experience to the national development in Scotland, focused on the Central Scotland Green Network. And except that, he says, except that we don't have a tax raising capacity to deliver. Perhaps this is something that we may come back when we open the floor to the audience, because I'm curious to know a little bit more about it. And then I will just address our francophone friends. Si vous, je suis bien conscient de de la impossibilité, certaines fois, de partager votre point de vue ou de tout comprendre dans votre langue maternelle. En tout cas, je vous remercie d'être ici aujourd'hui et de votre participation. Si vous avez des questions, n'hésitez pas à les écrire dans la chat et moi, je pourrai les traduire pour nos participants. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, everyone, for this into brackets switch of from English to French. Since there are no questions on the chat, I will then like to give the floor to our next speaker. We continue our tour around the world with almost zero carbon footprint. We go now to Brazil, where we have Paul telling us a little bit more about Sao Paulo. I will just upload his presentation. It should be up and running. Paul, the floor is yours.
Yes, muting. Hello, and have a nice day, have a nice evening for everyone. And I hope everybody is in a good health. And I must start saying thank you for this invitation and for building this opportunity, considering the changes that we had to do. And congratulations to the organization, especially here to the Scottish government and to the European Committee. I must say a special thank to Renata Gomes, representing Regions 4, and to Wickley, especially the office in charge of biodiversity, and the South America office also, that is in São Paulo also. To say thank you also to Oliver, a good friend and a stream fighter into the Secretariat for the CBD, and Teru and Hiroko and all the team of Aichi, representing GOES. That is a very important initiative integrating us. And here we can say thank you to who is watching us and participating, Elizabeth Choraki, on the post-2020 biodiversity framework, the European Union support project that is very important, and different partners that are helping us here in our actions, like the German government, even the European Union. They are very good partners, and especially our team here in São Paulo, the Secretariat for Infrastructure and Environment, the advisory for the International Affairs team, and the local partners like CETESB, our state environmental agency. And we had a good experience having a special event here with the support of all these people. The Bio 2020, that is, I guess, one of the reasons that we can be here. And the other is to say thank you also to the UNESCO Man and Biosphere Program, the biosphere reserves. We have 701 biosphere reserves around the world, and we have a different way to discuss territories and common governance and participative approach using this concept of biosphere reserves. And for us, it's very important. And I am the executive secretary of the National Council. So this is the context that we will talk about. And so the main context is that we are facing this pandemic. Here in São Paulo, we are in very important moments that probably most of you had faced before. And that brings us to think and how important are the solutions that we are discussing a lot. I'm not seeing my presentation, Roberto.
Yeah, just a second. Now you should be able to see it. I had a little IT issue, sorry.
Yes. Well, this is the idea to talk with you. And this is my email, and this is my WhatsApp and mobile for you if you want to. But this is the important context that we have. This very participative network working with us, and this crucial moment considering the pandemic that forces us to think in an integration way. And with the SDGs, with the climate change, and with other main issues, not thinking on biodiversity alone. The next slide, please. Thank you, Roberto. Mobilization of resources, as Tracy and Robbie and even Teru said very well before me, are very, a lot of kind of resources, and it's not only financial resources. And this is our main goal here in São Paulo, to mobilize these different kind of resources, industries, human capital, intelligence, traditional knowledge, financial resource, the union, the nature resource, the agriculture, and different kind of resource that we must integrate. Next, please, Roberto. Thank you. We can divide, and we used to do this, some different systems to approach the mobilization of resources. But all of them, we have this main issue, this to establish the common goals to every system. We selected the red ones, the internal for us, and the global systems, but there are a lot of ways to make these systems, to understand these systems. Next, Roberto, please. This is São Paulo. São Paulo is a very important state here in Brazil. We have 45 million of inhabitants. We have 645 municipalities. We share only 2.4% of the Brazilian territory, that it's a huge continent. And we have 1/3 of the GDP in Brazil, and different scales of exports and imports and services and finance activities in São Paulo. Only considering that the region where I live, the São Paulo metropolitan region, we have more than 20 million inhabitants, and this is this is part of our challenges. Next, please, Roberto. Having this huge population and this complex economy, we can consider this as a good aspect for us to think on the internal system, considering only São Paulo system. And one action that we are doing for the last years is working in sectoral councils and other groups, not only councils, but focusing sustainability. And we have one example that is the ethanol production. And why this is so important for us. It's so important because they are using a lot of our land in São Paulo. Around 20% of the territory of São Paulo is occupied by ethanol and sugar production. And this is very important, not for us only. This is around 12% of the global market on ethanol. And this is almost 50% of the national market. And we established years ago a protocol, it's called Greener Ethanol Protocol, and it's helping us to go further step by step and using this concept of different resources that we can mobilize. And I selected only 3, but there are some different more results, and there are some challenges that we must face, but they are co-generating electricity now. They are now supporting as a source of electricity the mills. We have more than 140 mills to produce ethanol. They are reducing the GHG emissions. We avoid almost 100% of the straw burning, and this is very important for us. And we have almost 50% of the water consumption on the mills, and different results, as I said before. But this is a way to optimize the sectoral groups focusing sustainability. And we have a lot of challenges with them, and we are working together in this. Good, didn't finish. The next one, please, Roberto. This is the map that probably you cannot see the small letters, even I. And this is a letter that we can use another internal system, the protected area system. Here you can see the colors, the state protected areas. São Paulo has the system, the state protected areas with the largest number in Brazil, not the largest area. We have a small area comparing with Amazon, for instance, but the largest number of protected areas. And we have this map, the national protected areas and the private protected areas. And this help us to understand the complexity of to deal with this. We have special institutions, but the main one is the Fundação Florestal, Forestry Foundation, that works with this. And having this concept to work with, like IT said and showed to us, with the stakeholders, each protected areas must have its own council to manage, to help them, to the Forest Foundation, the Fundação Florestal, to manage the protected areas, and even the other institutions that are managing the protected areas. So we have more than 1,500 counselors working in more than 150 protected areas around all the state. And this is a huge help for us because we have very local support for us. And this is way that we are working with and together the other 26 subnational governments here in Brazil. So we have one internal in São Paulo that is linked to the economy. The other is linked to the protected areas. Roberto, please, the next one. And the other way to think on internal system is using the concept of biosphere reserves. Here we have 7 biosphere reserves, but we are talking in this map. At the right image, you can see the present size of the area. That means that we are the largest, the biosphere reserve of Mata Atlântica is the largest biosphere reserve in the world. That means that we have into our system 17 states and 2,733 municipalities. That means 2,546 protected areas inside of these biosphere reserves. That means almost 90 million of hectares. We cannot work this huge biosphere reserve without acting in integration, or that means partnerships and integration. And this is a very important tool to work in Brazil, considering different ways to develop the biodiversity and the climate change and other environmental possibilities in Brazil. The next one, please. These are some pictures of São Paulo that we have, just not to show that we are only a huge city with more than 20 million inhabitants, but this is our main concern on biodiversity. And the previous pictures, one also integrating with the production, with the cities, and these are our concern. The next one, please, just to conclude. The system, the global system, this is the focus. We are trying to work with, and this is the idea, the advisory committee and subnational governments, the regions for ICLEI, and the secretariat of the CBD and GOES and other partners to be more efficient on the commercial partnerships amongst subnational governments, focusing the promotion of sustainability. We can do this, and we can work on this, and we using this tool, the commercial partnerships, we can engage more the economy sector to help us, and this is one idea that we can develop and quickly. The partnerships with São Paulo, with global actors, we talk about some examples, and promoting biodiversity conservation and sustainable development in Brazil, because we are working with the other 26 subnational governments with the horizontal partnerships, and into this work with the municipalities, the 645 municipalities. So we are open to be this tool for this challenge. And we can consider also the global biosphere reserves network, the UNESCO Man and Biosphere Program. They are having a lot of good discussions and networks. And just to conclude, as one example, I said the last words, I participate on the IberoMab meeting last week, and Sergio Guevara from Mexico, using a very important concept that we could use and understand, but this is from the Biosphere Reserves Network, that it's to consider the protected areas as areas that protect us, that probably change the idea, because they provide environmental service, they provide a lot of good services and inputs for our life and economy. And this, I think we could try to develop more. And thank you, and congratulations for this work.
Thank you very much to you, Paul, for this work, not only at the level, at the local level, but also your willingness to contribute also to the global level. And and I invite you now to have a look at the chat, because there are many comments about your work, specifically on the protected areas. And I will now would like to move back to Europe, where we have Karen from the Welsh government. Karen, I will just open your presentation. Just 1 second, because unfortunately there's been a little IT issue. I will just need to solve that, and then I'm back with a presentation. Okay, it seems solved. I now have your presentation ready to share it with you all. There you go.
Thank you. I'm going to leave my microphone on, my camera on mute at the moment, just because I've got a very weak internet connection, and I'm worried that you won't be able to hear me because I sound like a Dalek. So if everybody can hear me, is that okay with everybody? That's
absolutely okay. Don't worry.
Brilliant. Thank you. Firstly, can I say I'm really pleased to be part of the Edinburgh process as a member of Welsh Government, and we're really pleased to have the opportunity today to share with you what we're doing in Wales. My name is Karen Stothard. I lead a team on environmental governance policy, including international biodiversity in Welsh Government. And biodiversity is a key priority for our First Minister, who is pressing, and Wales, he's pressing for a green recovery from the current pandemic. In terms of Wales, Wales is part of the United Kingdom. Our small country covers an area of just over 20,000 square kilometres. We lie just between England to the east and the Irish Sea to the west. We've got a population of just 3.1 million. Wales is home to 3 national parks. We have Britain's first area of outstanding natural beauty, and we have some of the cleanest rivers and beaches in the UK. Around a third of Wales is currently is protected landscape. Wales's natural resources underpin our well-being, including our prosperity, health, culture, and identity. We depend on high-quality natural resources to provide our food, clean water, and air. Good quality natural resources are fundamental to our livelihoods. Next slide, please. So in Wales, we've developed an integrated ecosystem-based approach to our legislation, policies, and implementation. All are designed to work together, enabling delivery at all levels, across government, across our public bodies, and local community level, in managing Wales's natural resources, sustainability for our current and our future generations. Our legislation works together to tackle the climate emergency and the decline in biodiversity. It embeds our well-being goals, our sustainable development principle, as well as a process and principles to ensure we manage our natural resources in a sustainable and a joined-up way. It places key duties on biodiversity and resilience on government and our public bodies. Our policies, we have the Natural Resources Policy, which sets out our strategic priorities and policies, which are linked to our international commitments, and developing, implementing associated strategies and delivery of our programmes. Our biodiversity and resilient ecosystem duty embeds a biodiversity consideration across government and public bodies. In terms of mobilising our resources, we have area statements which come from the Environment Act, and these provide local evidence statements with maps, and they identify opportunities for investment and for collaborative action. We have funding mechanisms, and I'm only mentioning a few of them, but we've got schemes such as the Sustainable Management Scheme, our Enabling Nature Resources and Wellbeing Grant, which help provide funding. And we've also got a strategic budgeting, which secures cross-government finance. Can I have the next slide, please? So the next slide just gives you some ideas of some of those things and what they're delivering in terms of resource mobilisation. So our area statements are working with our local delivery agency, Natural Resources Wales, who are working really closely with communities through a really joined up participatory approach. And what they're aiming to do is find local solutions for the range of complex challenges we're now facing. We've got 7 area statements covering the whole of Wales, including one focusing on the marine environment. In terms of our strategic budgeting, biodiversity was added as a cross-cutting priority for the first time for the strategic budgeting process for 2020 to 2021. And this has led to the award of additional funding in Welsh Government's budget to build a more prosperous, more equal and a greener Wales. And this was published in December last year. This budget includes 15 million for Natura sites, Natura 2000 protected sites for improvements. We've got $500,000 for a biodiversity task force pilot. We've got 4.5 million for National Forest and 1.5 million for a National Peatland Action Group, in addition to a further 5 million fund that's been allocated for local places for nature. In terms of scheme, we've got a scheme called the Sustainable Management Scheme, which is a really bottom-up scheme and encourages people to apply for monies depending on local need and based on collaborative actions. So it provides public finance for collective local projects, and it's about mobilising skills and also facilitating delivery. We currently have 30 projects which are active across Wales, and this equates to 23 million. And we've got further projects in the pipeline. We've got I provide a key example on the slide, which is the Black Mountains Land Use Partnership. And this is delivering large-scale land management, with particularly focusing on the peatlands and bracken management. They're also looking at improving visitor experience to the area and local community engagement. This particular project has also got a rural skills program, which is upskilling local young people and enabling them to seek jobs in the area, as well as a local engagement program with the schools. Next slide, please. And my last slide is just really to say, again, many thanks for your time. I've enclosed a series of links for those who want to have a look at what else we've been doing in Wales, because I've just given you a quick overview, but I've also included my email address if anybody else wants to get in touch. So many thanks again. Diolch yn fawr.
Many thanks to you, Karen, for sharing your experience from the Welsh Government. I very much appreciated the Sustainable Management Scheme, because to have such a scheme that depends on the local needs is really a nice way of addressing the local request of even the population and the citizens. And now I would like to open the floor to all of you for any questions or any comments. I already noted down some of the questions that are raised that were in the chat. However, I know that at the beginning it's not very easy to open the floor and take the floor straight away. So I just ask Joe Pike to tell us a little bit more about the £1 billion roadmap as a way of breaking the ice, and then we can talk all together and take the floor. And Joe, if your microphone is activated.
Thanks very much, Roberto. Delighted to be given this opportunity. 2 minutes, I won't take any more. Thanks also to the Scottish Government for hosting this really interesting session, great presentations. So last Friday, the Scottish Wildlife Trust, where I'm Chief Executive, we're a nature conservation NGO, we launched a route map, which you can find on the Scottish Wildlife Trust's website. We delivered it in partnership with the Scottish Environment Protection Agency, so that's the Scottish Government's environmental regulator. And we decided to set ourselves a big target to aim high over the course of 2 years, bring together lots of different stakeholders to see what it might look like to bring in £1 billion worth of new money for nature conservation. So you'll see on the next slide that the main problem that we faced at the beginning was this chasm of incomprehension and scale between the finance world and the environment world. So I wanted to offer you 3 reflections to get people thinking on the journey and our aspirations for the future. So the 3 reflections were we concentrated on bringing together, first of all, people with an interest in seeing this project succeed. This is not a fundraising project. We haven't raised £1 billion, but we wanted to show the route towards that. The first thing was finding people with an interest in its success. The second is it was a very collaborative project, so we needed lots of different expertise from all sorts of different sectors. And the final thing is we needed people who were comfortable working with uncertainty. One of the first speakers, Tracy, I think, said, you know, this is hard. And we definitely found that, but we found that clarity emerged over the course of the project. So our hopes for the future, and if you just quickly show the final slide, you'll see that there are 9 elements in this route map. Each of them looks a bit like this, so broken down as simply as we could into 5 questions which reflected what people asked us most often. We wanted to make this real, we wanted to make it relevant, and we wanted to make it easy in Scotland for us, for people to engage with this topic. So that's all I'm going to say. Thank you very much, Roberto.
Thank you. Many thanks to you, Joe, and for this quick but very informative presentation. And I also would like now to give the floor to Lucy. I see you raised your hand. Lucy, if you would like to take the floor.
Hi, thank you. Thanks, John. Yeah, thank you for the invitation to today. It's been really interesting. My experience really reflects and links well to some of the comments that Tracy has made as well, in particular with regard to business investment. So for me, successful mobilisation of business investment happens when there's a need for that business to, and where that investment is sustainable, so that the land managers, so the rural businesses that maybe have to make some changes, feel comfortable to do that. And in my experience, that happens when collaboration happens around understanding both the needs of businesses and communities in the area, but also looking to help businesses and communities understand their dependencies on the landscape. And that's actually a key part of the project that I've been working on with businesses under landscape enterprise networks. And I should comment by saying that that is one of the elements of the £1 Billion Challenge Fund.
Thank you very much. And there was also Andy.
Yeah, hi there. So similarly, thanks very much for inviting me. So I'm head of value chain sustainability for Nestle UK and Ireland, but also co-developer of the Landscape Enterprise Network model. So very much to Lucy's point, one of the core challenges we see is if we're going to drive the level of scale and pace required, it's really important we bring business investment to the table. And typically the traditional approaches have tended not to understand what the business drivers are, and therefore struggle to bring that business investment through. So what we've really been trying to do, we've got a number of lens projects in different stages of evolution in different localities, but in Southwest Scotland as a specific example, is use lens to help businesses understand their dependencies on nature and use that risk-based approach to actually help them understand why they need to invest, and then use that as a proposition to bring together that shared interest investment, and also leverage it on a blended basis, so blending public and private finance into delivering multifunctional landscapes, but at landscape level. And that's playing through. Obviously, we're still working through the process for South West Scotland, but that's playing through really well, where we've got a range of interests coming to the table. Some from a business perspective, based very much around, for example, flood risk, or around organic soil content and carbon sequestration. There's also a significant interest around mental health delivery as well. And then there are some interests specifically around biodiversity outcomes. But the benefit is, by aggregating those interests and also aggregating up the interventions within the landscape, not only do you get the biodiversity outcomes that have specifically been funded, but the interventions that deliver those other multifunctional outcomes also deliver a range of additional biodiversity benefits as well. So for us, it's really important to understand how we best leverage that, drive that business investment, and then ultimately get the scale to bring in the institutional investors as well.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the words aggregation, cooperation. They are coming very often across all the different interventions. And I'm going now to address Karen. There are Debbie and Sue. They're asking the same question. I actually have myself this question. You mentioned before that biodiversity has been added as a budget priority. So how this changed somehow the amount and of the economic amount, but also the amount in terms of actions with respect to biodiversity? Did you observe a switch thanks to this prioritization of biodiversity in the budget?
So basically the fund is, the way it works is by identifying biodiversity as a cross-cutting theme, it embeds biodiversity thinking right across Welsh Government, so not just within our current Department of Environment and Rural Affairs, but right across. So by doing that, we've managed to sort of secure additional funding. So I gave some examples in terms of the Biodiversity Task Force pilot. That's a new pot of money. The National Forest is a new pot of money. And the Local Places for Nature is a local fund, again, which is an additional fund to the sort of biodiversity pot that would normally sit within our current department. So I don't know whether that answers that for you.
I think it does. And I now, there is another question that is to, I think it's to Andy. It's about Gillian, and it's asking whether the Southwest Lands covering just DNG, or is it extending up towards Glasgow?
Yeah, so it covers the area from Clyde all the way down to the Mull of Galloway, so Ayrshire as part of that. And that's that specific project. We also then have a number of other projects in different regions within the UK. And we're also working with the likes of World Conservation Society and IUCN on other regions globally.
Okay, thank you. I hope that addresses the question of Gillias. In the meantime, Paul, I have some questions for you as well. The first one is by Tracy. Tracy, I don't know if you want to ask it yourself regarding the use of ecological fiscal transfers. If you...
Thank you. Paul, I'm sorry to throw this on you because you didn't go into it, but I know that there are some states in Brazil that have been doing ecological fiscal transfer for quite a few years as a means to almost support municipalities who have more protected areas, so that they're not essentially penalized by not having more income generating activities on their land. I've always thought this would be a really good approach to replicate in countries, but it hasn't really sprung up much. And I'm wondering what you think about that. Is it useful? Are there challenges? Is it a terrible system?
Thank you for this question. I think I can try to advance in another question of Debbie, asking if is a direct contribution from the economy to the biodiversity or to the conservation. But indeed, we have in Brazil, in different states, we have these fiscal transfers to support municipalities from the subnational government, that for us, the state, to the municipality level. So we have this, using this tax, this estate tax. And it works in a different way in different states. Paraná is a good example. São Paulo we have, well, we have a different systems that they work, and I think they could be having this in mind, the difference even amongst our subnational governments. We could try to discuss the difference and try to use them as a good example. São Paulo is trying to improve this system, and we are not with this published, but we are trying to go further, more than only protected areas, because that this system consider protected areas as a limit to the development, so to the economy, and it's not so true. So we can try to work on the possibility to use this and to try to improve the system. As São Paulo is discussing, and probably it's almost ready to publish this. And next week we will launch our own forestry inventory, going in small details that will allow us to monitor the possibility to go further and further, not to consider only protected areas, but the municipalities that have some amount of forestry covering into their territories, not as a protected area. So we are trying to improve this system, and this would be very nice to have, well, you and other global partners to discuss this. And thinking on the question at the chat about Debbie, we have these two ways to work with companies. One is to work, as I present to you, using sectorial councils and groups. And the other is this tool that Tracy brought to this discussion, that is the fiscal transfers. So we have the regular taxes, and part of these regular taxes are dedicated to this conservation activities. So we don't have a special one. We use the amount, the total, and to use it to the conservation activities. I don't know, Tracy, if I answer it.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And there is also a question by Jeremy to Teru.
Hello, Jeremy Eppel. Like Tracy, a member of the CBD's Resource Mobilisation Expert Panel, and thank you for a very interesting seminar today, conference. My question was to our Japanese colleague from Aichi. Hello. I think if I read your slide correctly, that you said that the prefecture was able to add, was I right, 5% to the corporation tax for the forest tax to get additional resources for biodiversity. So my question really was, and we heard from our Scottish colleague just after that, that not all municipalities have that tax raising power. But my question to you is, how much resistance did you have from local businesses adding something to their tax burden? And if so, how did you overcome that? And what advice would you have for others? Because we're trying to see more business engagement on biodiversity, and adding an additional bit of tax isn't always going to be popular. So how did you succeed, and what's your advice? Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very good question. actually, I guess the balance is important. About 80% of the revenue is come from individuals. So the taxation on corporation is quite thin. Only 5% of the corporate tax per capita. The corporate tax is divided into two parts. So the basic part is defined by the scale of the company, and the other part is defined by their benefit, annual benefit. So the forest tax is charged on the basic part of the corporate tax. So it's not so heavy, I think, for the corporations. And as I said first, the 80% is burdened by individuals, and so only about 20% is burdened by the company. So I didn't hear there was strong restoration from economic sector when we introduced this green tax. Does it make sense?
It makes sense, and it's very encouraging to hear. I think in a lot of countries, certainly my own, any additional tax burden, however small, on businesses, especially in the difficult economic circumstances we now face, will probably not be popular. So I think we have to make the case why this is in their social and economic broader interest, and not just a burden. So thank you for that.
Thank you both.
Welcome.
It's indeed encouraging to hear that, and a little bit more encouraging should be the challenge by Oliver to all econometric experts on this group. So Oliver, I don't know if you want to present your challenge to everyone.
It's thank you, and what a great discussion here, by the way. So my question is very simple. I read many years ago a study from the US that looked at the amount of actual public resources that were invested in conservation areas and restoration areas, conservation and restoration estates. And the conclusion that something like 67% of the total US dollars invested in conservation and restoration per unit of area actually came from being spent from states and municipalities, not from federal governments. Which means that even if the funds were allocated at the federal level, they ended up for expenditure capacity and for no other reason being spent by and for local and subnational governments. I wonder if any of you has seen any more recent statistics. I've been looking for that and I haven't found it. So this is my challenge. Thank you.
Now we can go two ways. There can be an awkward silence where nobody would like to address this issue, or there's going to be a break.
Which would be a good point to say that we need to do more research on that. Thank you.
But luckily enough, I can see two people raising their hands. That gives me hope. The first one is Tracy, and then Paul. Tracy?
I'm not really going to answer your question, Oliver, but I'm going to add to it. I'm going to add to the complexity. I'm sure there are studies, and I know with my biofin work, one of the things we do at a country level is a biodiversity expenditure review, and as much as possible, we try to look at all levels of government so we can see exactly how much money is being spent on biodiversity at national, state or provincial and municipal level, if we managed to get those numbers when we did that study. And I know we did it for South Africa, but I cannot remember those numbers off the top of my head. But I would like to add to your question, how much land is easier for protected areas? Let's look at the amount of funding that goes to the subnational level, and then let's look at the area of land that those organizations or agencies are required to manage compared to what is being managed by the national agencies. And that might be another interesting part of the...
I think that makes the percentage even higher, Tracy, because you see, if you take not only the consolidated amount of municipal parks and restoration areas, I think when you look at conservation and you add restoration, probably you would have more like 80% at local and subnational. Thank you.
And there is another brave participant, Christian. I give you the floor.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is Christian from the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. First of all, thank you so much for the presentations. Learned a lot. It was very, very enlightening. Really appreciate that. I have a question to Tracy on resource mobilization in a more general sense. I recently attended a webinar and there was a speaker from the JEF, and he was mentioning that only 5 to 10% of global biodiversity funding is coming from multilateral sources. And I think today was quite interesting to see what national initiatives are being undertaken to raise domestic funding for biodiversity. I think this is very, very inspiring. But especially when it comes to countries in the global south, domestic funding, especially post-COVID-19, is going to be very hard to find. So we need to figure out a way how we can increase funding from multilateral sources. And I just wanted to ask Tracy and maybe also Jeremy if you have some suggestions on how this could be done and how we can increase the percentage of multilateral funding and also make it more accessible to more stakeholders, because even when multilateral funding is available, sometimes it's horribly difficult to access. Thank you.
Thanks. That's an extremely pertinent question. Firstly, I'll start at the end of your question. It is extremely hard in some cases for countries, especially the countries that need it most, even within the global south, the countries that need it most within that group. It is very hard for them to access the funds. There are processes in place that are there for rigor to make sure that the money goes to the right things, but it can make things more complicated. And I believe that we need to build in stronger support for countries to access the money and also to spend it. I think there is a case, there's always going to be a case to be made to have good international funding, multilateral funding flowing to the global south. And we're never going to not need to make that case. There will always be competing priorities for money, and we'll never stop needing to say, hey, biodiversity is also really important. I also mentioned in my talk the importance of integrating biodiversity into other funding flows. So there's a lot more money flowing for climate change. We know nature-based solutions are important. We need to make sure that nature-based solutions, A, get scaled up, but also to ensure that there are genuine biodiversity benefits in nature-based solutions. And then kind of the flip of your question and my answer to your question is, especially going forward, as we climb out of this COVID experience, it's really important to look at reducing harmful expenditure. And I believe that these funding flows should also be focusing on that. A, reducing harmful expenditure of their own money, but also what they invest in all these countries should include helping countries to shift behavior in the public sector and in their own private sectors to do less harmful things. And that becomes quite a systemic and strategic investment from these big funding sources. I'm wondering if Jeremy wants to add to that?
Not a lot. I very much agree with what Tracy said. I mean, I think when you see our report, and particularly the report Tracy's led on looking to the future, you'll see some more ideas in there about how domestic resources can be further enhanced. You're absolutely right. I mean, the OECD's latest study shows that about 2/3 of all the resources do come from the domestic fundraising. And you're right, in the post-COVID world, everything will be under pressure, and that's true in developed countries as well as developing. But mainstreaming, if you can bear that word, which is a very associated work stream within the CBD process of the one we've been doing on resource mobilization, also has quite an important role to play here when you think about the budgets that are actually being spent on water and sanitation, on agriculture, on flood management, even on disaster risk reduction and so on. Some of those kinds of areas where thinking about how you can get some bang for your biodiversity out of that buck is going to be very important too. So I think it's not all a question of, can we have some extra, please? That would be good, and we should go on thinking in that way to some extent. But you know, how much is already being spent on things that actually are potentially able to deliver some benefits for biodiversity, and we should seek to maximize that wherever that's possible. So just some ideas, but it's a very important debate. So thanks for the question.
It is indeed. And I'm just aware of the time. It's 3:30, and I now should summarize my notes in just a few words. This is just one page of the many pages I was writing in all my notes. I think that I will just summarize everything we said. And so starting from the last point raised, the econometric challenge, I would call it like that, launched by Oliver. I think we need to work a little bit more on this point, because we need to know how much it's spent already, but at the same time, as we were saying earlier, we already know that there is the need to generate more, to leverage more, and we also see the importance of the cooperation, the collaboration. We've seen I would call it an horizontal and a vertical one. A vertical on the different level of governance, from the international to the national to the subnational and to the local, and at the same time across the different stakeholders, because we've seen the importance of involving citizens together with university and research organizations, but also the private sector. So I think these are really especially the last point is something that we really need to focus on for the future, because as the 2050 vision says, we have to work together if we want to achieve the biodiversity to be valued, conserved, restored, and wisely used, maintaining ecosystem services, sustaining a healthy planet, and delivering benefits essential for all people. With this message of the 2050 vision, I would like to thank you all for your participation. It's been really interesting. Thanks to all the speakers, but also to all the participants that took the floor, and to those who didn't have the chance to ask these questions, please continue to stay engaged via the Attendify app. And I don't know if, John, you wish to say a few words about the next event or the next steps, if we already have a date for the next event, or if there is any communication you want to say.
Yes, thank you, Roberto. Just to remind people that the consultations on the zero draft and on the revised plan of action for subnational governments are both open at the moment. You can find that information in Attendify, and if you haven't done so, please go on there and respond to those consultations. In terms of the next steps for the Edinburgh process, we're now starting to take on board the responses we've had so far, to review the outputs from the 4 thematic webinars, and we will be shortly writing that into the Edinburgh process reports. And the next meeting will be on the 2nd of July, where we're going to have 2 sessions, the feedback, the results of the whole Edinburgh process so far, so the consultations and thematic webinars, and outline what we intend to feedback to the CBD as an outcome of this process, and to seek kind of endorsement of that by the participants that have been involved in the process throughout. So please keep an eye on Attendify, and we'll add the links for those feedback sessions on the 2nd of July there, and please attend those as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Et si vous êtes intéressé aussi à revoir les webinaires, il sera disponible sur YouTube dans les jours prochains. Et n'hésitez pas à rester en contact avec nous si vous avez des questions après avoir revu les webinaires. Et vous pouvez noter sur vos agendas les 2 juillet comme la prochaine conférence événement que nous allons organiser. Vous avez les horaires dans le chat partagé en ce moment par Martha. And I was just saying that if you wish to watch again this webinar, it will be available in a few days in YouTube, and we can continue to engage via the Attendify app. And I look forward to see you again on the 2nd of July. You have the information shared in this moment by Martha. Thank you very much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you. Bye-bye.